It is the morning sports desk for Thursday, April 11th. I'm CJ Baumgartner. There's Corey Tackman. Corey, where were you? Where were you the moment you learned of the passing of O.J. Simpson?
Well, you told me like 15 minutes ago. He's dead.
The juice is no longer loose.
The juice is not loose even a little bit. Were you alive when the O.J. Simpson thing happened, with the white Bronco chasing
what year was
down
that?
the street?
95?
I can't even remember what year.
94.
What year.
I don't even think my parents had met at that point.
Totally. This is one of those things. I can't remember how old I was. I would have been in elementary school when it happened. But there were a few things that, like, in my life, like, took over every little bit of news. It just, you couldn't go anywhere without it, right? There was Clinton and Monica Lewinsky. That was everywhere. John Benet Ramsey. That was everywhere. You could not escape that. Challenger's a little older. Is a little older than me. But you know, that was obviously huge too. You know, on every tabloid and every supermarket, there was a story about Bat Boy. That was everywhere I went for my entire growing up life. And this O.J. Simpson thing, it's the only way I could possibly explain it to you is like maybe the most recent thing, because everyone's go-to would be like September 11th, right?
Right.
But the Boston Marathon bombing, do you remember how that was on social media? How you couldn't go anywhere on social media without another update from someone somewhere. And it was just this constant barrage of information. And some of it was good, some of it wasn't good. It was constantly correcting itself. One of the most unbelievable use cases for especially Twitter was the Boston Marathon bombing. Because the information was so constant and instantaneous, there was information that was incorrect, but it would also instantaneously correct itself. It was a fascinating thing. That is the most recent thing in my memory that resembles what that O.J. Simpson thing was. You couldn't turn on a television, with obviously the exception of no social media at the time. It was absolutely a bananas story. Oh, the Princess Diana, her dying, that would be included kind of in this. So there were a handful of things that just took over the world. And because there wasn't social media, because it wasn't fractured, it could take over the world. Like, it was on every news station. It was on every station, every news station's affiliate. It was crazy. It was crazy. And of course, you know, the thing about it, one of the things that was so fascinating about that Bronco chase was everybody thought he was going to kill himself on TV. Like, everyone was basically convinced that we were going to see O.J. Simpson without knowing kind of what was going on. Pieces being put together on the fly and helicopters overhead and following along. We knew that existed and that OJ wasn't pulling over. We just everyone thought he was just going to pull over and end it all on live television. It was crazy, man. It's just crazy.
There's nothing really in my life that I can equate the O.J. Simpson stuff to. There was no cultural flashpoint like there was for that, where everybody was just kind of fixated on that one thing. I mean, there's a couple other examples that aren't quite apples to apples, but I'm going to say that there really isn't anything like it. And obviously, for somebody who grew up after the fact and, you know, had basically all media kind of telling you, kind of getting backfilled by watching people give their takes on media. And by that, I mean watching an episode of Family Guy that makes fun of the whole situation in and of itself.
Right.
That's how you get filled in on some of this information. It's crazy to see how this all played out. But
yeah, the most recent thing that had this much there's some, it's politically charged stuff, right? Like
Right.
the Ukraine stuff took pretty hard hold for a while. The previous 2 elections took pretty hard hold.
A
Donald
worldwide
Trump
pandemic.
but that's the real answer here.
Right.
The thing that took over the entire world and what everyone was talking about was COVID. That's probably the most recent perfect example of this.
Right. That's probably the closest one. And even that, it feels weird equating that to the same thing as OJ Simpson. And so it's weird how that plays out. But OJ Simpson passed away this morning. His family passed away yesterday. His family announced it this morning. They said due to cancer. There's really not much else to say about. There's a lot of stuff you can say about OJ Simpson, but for the purpose of this program, I got nothing.
As a maybe a more direct point of comparison, do you remember when Aaron Hernandez went to prison and what he went to prison for?
That was a bit of a flash. That was like a mini flash.
So, and the reason why probably that it was only a mini flashpoint is because everyone older than you remembered OJ doing it, allegedly. You know what I mean? So this is kind of the first time that something like this, there had been actors who had been accused of some things throughout the course of history that you could pinpoint to. But as far as athletes go, and he was beloved, right? He was a beloved athlete and pop culture icon.
He was on Monday Night Football. He was acting. He was
exactly.
That guy was popular.
Well, so this is now you'd have to talk to people older than me to appreciate OJ Simpson as a football player. But the reason I knew him and then later learned on about his football stuff is because we loved at our house the Naked Gun movies with Leslie Nielsen, and OJ was in all of those. That's how I got to know OJ, was through that sphere of these ridiculous, silly movies that were, they were just so funny. And then learning he was a player, and then asking my dad, my dad be like, he wasn't just, he was the best. He was the best. He was the best player on planet Earth. And probably arguably even in college, he was already the best at it. So that's the sort of I don't know it'd be like Travis Kelce. You know what I mean? Or Jason Kelce right now. Just all of a sudden something bad happens and they're following a Jason Kelce Escalade down I-35 in Kansas City. Like, what the hell is going on here? It'd be that sort of in front, that sort of pop culture overlap and supreme athlete at the same time. It would be staggering, and it was. It's
just crazy, and that's what we kind of leave off on. So OJ Simpson, by the way, his family posted off of his account, and they did not leave comments on.
That was the right choice.
That was the right choice, because I think even Bleacher Report turned their comments off, and they're just a neutral party in all of this. They're like, we're not dealing with whatever the heck these comments are going to be, which is fascinating. Anyway,
this is a weird part of it. I know we want to move on, and we can end with this, but this is the strange part of this, is that, but you hate to reduce him to a character, but he is not a sympathetic character,
right?
I think that would be a respectful way of saying this, but he's still he's probably got some family members who unconditionally loved him till the, you know what I mean? As you do with your family. I don't know how he removed or kept everybody in his circle as his life went on, but there's probably a few people in his life who unconditionally loved that guy and are really, really sad on a day like today. That is hard to remember that because of how unsympathetic he is as a human.
That's fair.
It's weird. These sorts of things are weird.
Okay, we have some things that get weird with the Wolves ownership stuff in a little bit that I want to get to.
Yes.
But let's first talk. I'm going to just give you my thoughts on the Nuggets game yesterday, Corey, and then I'll give you the floor. So the Wolves, I thought, outplayed the Nuggets in the first half. outside of Jokic, who's just Jokic. And then in the second half, you kind of saw the Wolves start to crumble. And even in the first half, there were glimpses of it. They'd turn the ball over a little bit too much. They wouldn't necessarily capitalize when they turned over Denver. And in the second half, their offense just sputtered. And the Wolves in the final 6 minutes of games aren't always reliable in kind of hanging with teams. And whether it's just Anthony Edwards' shot selection, whether it's not having Karl Anthony Towns, whether it is what it is, the Wolves offense crumbled late. Their defense held things over for the most part against a team like Denver. Holding them to 116 should typically win you a game, but when your offense consistently can't get above 110, that's where things start to get iffy for the Timberwolves. This isn't a whole, and I don't want to make this a whole referendum on the Wolves, but all this is you sometimes lose to a good basketball team. Here's why the Wolves lost. It shouldn't impact anything in the grand scheme of things, but if you want a lesson to take away, it's that the Wolves need to get better at their offense in crunch time. They sometimes, and Anthony Edwards, again, is young, and I'm not saying that he's a selfish player. His career is this always who he's going to be. But right now, Anthony Edwards needs to learn that he can't just down by 6 say, I'm going to shoot a 3 now to try and cut that in half. You have to keep putting good offensive possessions on top of each other. Otherwise, they can spiral out of control, and that's what it did. And the Wolves got down 10 with 4 to go. And against a team like Denver, that pretty much seals it. I know people will complain about there, and I don't think it was great, but overall the Wolves lost them that game on their own accord. That's all the points I have to say about that Wolves game last night. Corey, what do you got?
You hit kind of the main point in my mind, and I would probably even just walk it back a little bit from what you said. Denver's the defending champion with the MVP on their team. And this game was in Denver. And we thought yesterday, or I should say, I thought yesterday or the last couple of days that maybe Denver wouldn't take this game seriously. And they did. And the fans were super into it. They were really loud. They lost a game on the road to the defending champion and number one team, and probably everyone's favorite to come out of the West and defend their title. And the final score, they lost by 8, 9,
something like
that.
Yeah,
like it's fine. I don't think there is a referendum on this game. They lost a close game. They were in it the whole way until the fourth quarter, basically, when Denver decided this is our home floor. You're not going to beat us on our home floor. That's okay. There's nothing. It would have been awesome if they would have won it. It's not a huge deal that they lost this game.
Right. And there's just the little things you can point at and little things you can kind of take away. Okay, here's why they didn't win. Here's why they lost. And we both expected them yesterday on the sports desk. We said they're probably not going to win this game, but we wouldn't be surprised if they did. And this is about how I think if you would have asked us 24 hours ago, how does that game go? I think we would have said something like that. And that's just where things sit with the Wolves. That's where they're at. I don't know. They're going to fight with OKC for the 2 seed now. OKC they're going to play Milwaukee with no Giannis. They're going to play a Dallas team that's already locked in their playoff position. And basically both teams are fighting to avoid the 3 seed. Why do you say that? Well, the 3 seed is a date with the New Orleans Pelicans, and both teams are going to avoid the red hot New Orleans team like the plague. And it's going to be the Wolves should beat Atlanta on Friday on their home floor. It comes down to, what's Phoenix's plan? Are they locked into their playoff position? Are they still trying to avoid the play-in? How do things look for them? I think they have to be in the play-in. So I think are they trying to be in that first play-in game versus the bottom play-in game? How does that matter for them? And that might depend on how hard Phoenix wants to play in this series. I got to look at the Western Conference, but overall, Corey, how do things kind of look for the Wolves from a big picture standpoint now?
Literally nothing's changed, CJ. There's no referendum. They have been a 1 to 3 seed literally since game 1 of the season. The Timberwolves are really good, and Denver is really good, and OKC is really good. We've now gone like 5 minutes on the Timberwolves, and we're making it up.
Right.
There's nothing to say about they lost to it would have been awesome if they would have won it. They didn't. They're not going to be worse than a 3 seed. Like literally nothing has changed for them.
Mm-hmm. And now the silver lining is Karl Anthony Towns will likely play on Saturday. So that can inject you with a little bit of some hope in this one and kind of see how that'll be the thing to monitor through the next couple games. Okay, here we go. Ownership talk. You ready? You ready for ownership fight 2024?
Yeah.
Okay. So yesterday, Adrian Wojnarowski of ESPN said that Laurie and Rodriguez were planning to cut payroll once they took the team, meaning they were going to go under the luxury tax because they were going to go under the luxury tax, which means that because the Wolves currently are right now, they're going to have to slash some payroll significantly, which means losing one of the 3 stars. That's basically the gist of it. Everybody kind of assumes that's Glenn Taylor propaganda. Corey, what do you think?
I don't know that anybody, when people have actually really talked about the Wolves long term, does anybody have Karl Anthony Towns on this roster in the future?
I don't really.
Is Karl Anthony Towns a Timberwolf for life?
If they make like the Western Conference Finals, or if they win the NBA Finals this year, probably.
Okay, that's a fine exception, I think, to that question.
Because you're just kind of forced to run it back again.
I don't think there's anybody who thinks Karl Anthony Towns is a Timberwolf for life. And by the way, if you win the whole thing, and you think you can be better by removing Karl Anthony Towns from the equation, why wouldn't you do that? Right. Now, I'm not saying there's a better option than Karl Anthony Towns. I'm just saying from their perspective, why wouldn't you try to make the team better? Complacency has never won anybody a title.
Right.
Ever. So what's the move? I think probably what that means is that Karl Anthony Towns was not going to be a part of the team going forward. Obviously, it's not a good look. Obviously, you don't want to just give up on this Anthony Edwards thing. But probably what it means is that they were going to find a way to move Karl for pieces that were cheaper. That's probably what that means. I don't know. I don't like to hear it. Just like I didn't like to hear the Twins were going to have a payroll cut. You know what I mean? That's not doing the Twins any good to hear that news. It's not doing Twins fans any good to hear that sort of news. This is not doing the Timberwolves fans any sort of good to hear that news. But what it actually probably means is that Karl Anthony Towns is really, really expensive. And if they can offload him for a number of pieces, including draft capital, that's probably what was going to happen. That's probably what that means.
Okay. One last thing on the Wolves, and then we'll move on, is Shams went on Stadium TV and was talking earlier today about the Minnesota Timberwolves. So here's what and this is with the ownership fight in the background. Now remember, Glenn Taylor, according to Laurie and Rodriguez, did not think that they could get Tim Connelly to come here. 2 top seeds in the West, says Shams, have Minnesota president Tim Connelly's fingerprints with Denver and Minnesota. Amid ownership turmoil in Minnesota, sources say Connelly has an opt-out in his contract after this season. So Tim Connelly, the guy who pulled off the Gobert trade, who brought in Mike Conley, who got rid of D'Angelo Russell, brought in Nickeil Alexander-Walker, extended Naz Reid, all this other stuff. If ownership kind of looks like it's going to be weird, has an opt-out after this season. I don't know if that means, I heard some people say this is a make or break season now for the Wolves, and I don't quite agree with that. I just think that if there's another layer to this Timberwolves sandwich that has over the course of this franchise, it just has another way of adding to the crap sandwich if that just ends up happening.
Well, I think you can pile that information onto, let me ask a hypothetical. So Laurie and A-Rod file financials that say they're gonna cut payroll to get under the luxury tax.
Mm-hmm.
What indication have you ever gotten from Glenn Taylor that says he's happy about being having to pay the luxury tax.
Well, that's my point.
So exactly, this is all you add all of these pieces together, and it comes around to Glenn Taylor doesn't want to be paying the luxury tax either. Like if Tim Connolly wants to improve this team, neither party that's in charge is probably going to be wanting to pay the price that Tim Connolly wants.
Right.
They might be hosed no matter what happens, which I guess is the point you were getting to.
Yeah, it's one of those things. I'm not saying it is going to happen. I'm not saying that we should be worried every single day. My point is like, that's just a nugget of information that we can just kind of let sit for the next couple months, because wouldn't it just be a perfect Timberwolves thing for their best season in 20 years to end in an ownership fight, and then the president of basketball operations going, "Oh, this is weird. Peace out."
What is let's say hypothetically the move to get below the luxury tax, is to not have Carl on the team anymore? What sorts of, like, obviously there's gonna need to be a return for somebody like that. Do you like that idea? Is it a ridiculous idea, or are you literally now, because of the way this season has gone, are you stuck isn't the right word, but do you have to run it back because of the success this season has seen?
I think depending on how the playoffs go, but I think there's a good chance. Again, if the Wolves are like a 4 seed and they were good but not great, and maybe they win a playoff series, maybe they don't, I think getting rid of Karl Anthony Towns isn't as bad. But I think coming off a season where you're going to be a top 3 seed, you're going to have a nice little playoff run in front of you, it'd be weird to ship him off, because you're not trading him for draft picks and letting those draft picks sit. You're trading him for other NBA players who are going to not in and of themselves be a max player, but they're all going to add up to be a max salary player. So that will be the question about what they want to do. My guess is that I think owners are okay paying the luxury tax when their team is good. And I think Glenn Taylor would be willing to pay the luxury tax if the Timberwolves are a top 3 seed in the West. And if that's a possibility, because you're going to make that money back, because you're going to have playoff tickets and you're going to have a lot of revenue, because the Wolves went over the luxury tax when they got D'Angelo Russell. So
Gosh, that feels like you're giving him a lot of credit.
Well, I'm thinking about it from a business perspective. That's why because you're going to make that money back with the playoff tickets. You don't want to go over the luxury tax if you're going to be a 6 seed and you're not going to get 4 home playoff games and you're not going to get all of that kind of stuff. I think that's where that comes into the equation, but I don't know. The Timberwolves always find new ways to surprise us. So I think that's I think that's the big takeaway in the end. So let's move on and talk about the Twins. There's not a ton to talk about. They beat the Dodgers 3-2 yesterday. Eddie Julian with a 2 home run game. They're 4-6 after 10 games.
Weirdly handsome Ed Julian.
Weirdly handsome Ed Julian. For those who don't know, there's a post on Twitter that has a guy who's got a media guide, and it's like obviously joking about some of the other things, and just one is weirdly handsome. And so I
love stuff like that when it feels so it's very
somebody's
weirdly.
Like, now that you brought it up, it does make sense.
He is kind of weirdly handsome, isn't he?
He's got a weird haircut, but like, okay. Those darn French Canadians.
That's what I love. The first part about it was like, he's French, so he's never had to fight for anything or whatever. It's just so funny.
Doesn't want to improve his defense or something. Or takes strike 3 too often. Kirby Puckett would put the ball in play. He's looking to drive in runs or something like that, which is awesome. Which is good. So anyway, Ed Julian had a couple homers on a good bounce back game for him. The play of the game, I think, ends up being Carlos Correa on the relay throw. So Shohei Ohtani on first base, 2 outs. Top of the 7th inning, Freddie Freeman rips one down the right field line, takes a weird bounce on Kirilloff, bounces around in the corner. He gets the ball in quickly. Carlos Correa grabs it on the outfield grass, like right where that line is on the right field side, and throws a bullet to Christian Vasquez. So much where when Vasquez caught the ball, the momentum was taking him to where his glove just sat right in front of home plate, and Ohtani had nothing to do but slide into the glove. That's perfect. This is a Carlos Correa appreciation day.
Perfect relay from the Twins. But I guess the point I want to bring up, because you brought it up to me, and I'll let you kind of fill in the blanks on this. But just to clarify, so we understand what the situation was. This was a ball that was hit into the right field corner. And Carlos Correa, the shortstop, got all the way over to the first baseline to be the cutoff and the relay man for that throw. What? That's not how you're supposed to do it.
That's not how, if your coach tells you to have the shortstop come in and throw, it's not a great day for you. And that's kind of what it is. It's the high school, like we've all seen high school baseball teams. The second baseman, and I know because I played second base, does not have a great arm typically. The shortstop has a cannon, and sometimes it's the first baseman who's the cutoff. So maybe that's also the case too in that situation. But the shortstop's got a cannon arm. And if you have a shortstop who has a good arm, why wouldn't you use that? Now, it's a lot to ask of Carlos Correa because he had to run from shortstop all the way to the right field line and make a throw. But when he can do it, why not let him do it? That's basically the thing. Is it more fundamentalist to say, oh, that's Carlos? I think Carlos Santana was playing first base today or yesterday. That's Carlos Santana's a relay. He's got to get it and throw. But Corey, this isn't even an indictment of Carlos Santana. If you have Carlos Santana or Carlos Correa as your relay guy, which Carlos are you taking?
And also, they just spent a month in Florida practicing this sort of stuff. Like, they know what the expectation is, right? This is a part of the understanding of they've gone through this scenario. They know what it is. Carlos, on a ball into the corner in this situation, you got to follow him to second base. That's a double all the way. You're going to have to follow anyway. Like, you follow him in, you got second base coverage, and we'll get Carl. Like, it's just is a fascinating and really well executed. It would have been a perfectly executed play if they would have executed it normally. But it's such a weird setup. But they clearly had a plan and executed this abnormal relay throw from right field towards home. It's pretty cool. That's, I think, the neat option. And you've talked about this before, a really wonderful indicator to Carlos Correa's health. A year ago, he doesn't get from deep shortstop. Freeman's a right-handed batter, right? He doesn't get from
Freeman's a lefty.
Is he lefty?
Yeah.
So he's probably drifted over a little bit. It's less of a long run.
He's probably like right up the middle.
It's still, that's a long ways to go. That's a long way. He has to run a full base path anyways. So that, I don't know. It's all just really, I'm rambling because it's neat.
And then grab it, have a perfect relay, and throw a bullet. That thing didn't take a hop. That thing was just straight hose piece to Christian Vasquez, who laid down a tag, and it wasn't even close. I don't know what the umpire was calling it initially safe. Like, at first I thought he had a bad angle. He saw it, but I think it might just have been, there's no way he could have done that so cleanly. And they did. Vasquez, by the way, threw another runner out. He's thrown like 4 runners out on the base paths this season, which, again, in terms of a good relay to throw a guy out at the plate and a guy who can throw guys out at the catching spot, that's just aesthetically pleasing as a baseball fan.
They also got Ohtani, who is a natural center fielder. Like, that guy can run. They didn't get Matthew LeCroy round on the bases on this one.
No. And that would have been the tying run in the top of the 7th. And if the Dodgers tie the game, they probably win. The Twins were not scoring another run.
Baseball's so cool.
That's the big thing. Like, it's a play in the 7th inning that changes everything. And it meant that Shohei Ohtani and Freddie Freeman were not going to hit again if this game, if the Twins were going to win. Because Betts came up at the top of the order in the 9th inning as the last out of the game. That avoided having to face those guys one more time. That's why Ohtani went to home. That was their shot. And the Twins took him down. And that's just, when a player makes a play like that, you know that they're going to win the game. And
I know we both know that the Dodgers have Mookie and Shohei and Freddie Freeman. I know that we know that, but it is hilarious to have a conversation and just casually throw out those names and then remember that they're all playing for the same team. That team is insane.
They're good. They're so good. So I can't wait for their first round playoff exit. That'll be really fun to watch.
Be great, wouldn't it?
Anyway, the Twins are 4-6. We'll kind of get to a vibe check later, but overall, they're okay. Cleveland's off to
I think that is the vibe check, by the way.
There's some things that aren't ideal, but at the end of the day, you're still 4-6. So
they're in it. They'll be fine.
They're in it. Detroit's kind of came back to earth a little bit. The game got rained out today. It's going to be a day-night doubleheader on Saturday.
It's not. It's going to be a traditional doubleheader.
A traditional doubleheader. Okay, so they're just going to play one into the other.
Yep.
So on Saturday, and the Twins have a 4-game series in Detroit. This is a good chance for the Twins to face old friend Kenta Maeda Friday. So, I can't wait the fan base will surely be rational if Kenta has a good game. And surely will be okay. Anyway, that's where things sit. The Tigers did not have a great week. I think they barely won a series against Pittsburgh. They lost the series to Oakland. So Sacramento or whatever you want to call them now.
Who even plays for Pittsburgh? Does Jason Kendall still catch for them?
Michael A. Taylor plays for Pittsburgh.
Oh yeah. Cool. Andrew, they have
that O'Neal Cruz, who's the Ellie De La Cruz's brother.
Oh, sure. Yeah. That's right.
They got that Brian Reynolds. They got a couple guys. They drafted Paul Skeens out of LSU, who's probably going to pitch at some point this year for the Pirates. But
is he the one who's dating the gymnast?
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
He was an Air Force guy. So I actually know somebody, a family friend who's at the Air Force Academy right now, like at the school.
So Charlotte's, right?
Yes. Yeah. She, I don't think she met him, but I think she's like, yeah, I know who that guy was. He was on campus.
Yeah. That's cool.
Then he transferred to LSU and became the dude. So
the dude. Cool.
Yeah, no, it was good. Okay. So that moves us on to our last bit of thing that we're going to talk about today. It's the number 7 overall pick in the NFL draft. The Minnesota Vikings hold the number 11 overall pick. They also have the number 23 overall pick. No second and third round picks this year. No second round pick next year. So I think is how that goes. But the Minnesota Vikings, by the way, a little nugget on ESPN that was revealed. The Vikings do not like going to pro days in terms of evaluating quarterbacks. And we can tell because the Vikings did not have Kevin O'Connell or Kwesi Adofo-Mensah at J.J. McCarthy's pro day. But they sent Josh McCown, the quarterback coach. And Kevin O'Connell said, don't read too much into that. He's like, we want to do our own workouts. And the reason is they want to get quarterbacks uncomfortable a little bit because pro days are very manufactured. They're set up by the school. So it's a very much like they want to get you in a spot where the quarterback doesn't have as much, where the team can kind of work some things out specifically in the private workouts. So they're going to hold more stock into that. That's a quick aside. But the number 7 overall pick, Corey, should the Minnesota Vikings trade up to number 7 to go get, let's say J.J. McCarthy doesn't get picked number 4. Let's say he starts to slide. Obviously, if it's Drake May or Jaden Daniels, I think we're both on board for trading up to that point. But if it's J.J. McCarthy or let's say Michael Penix, maybe J.J. McCarthy goes off the board and the Vikings want to make sure they get their guy. Is a trade up to number 7 worth it for the Minnesota Vikings?
What does that trade look like in your opinion?
In my opinion, I feel like it's just the 11th pick and the 23rd pick.
Yeah. I think that's a reach for Penix. Probably. I think that's a reach for Penix, which is weird because a few picks later, if you took him at 11, I wouldn't be heartbroken about it, Right. But I think, if you got to do it, to get McCarthy because you think he's the guy, sure, that's fine. I don't think there's nothing won, nothing lost in that move. I don't think. I don't think I would do it for Penix because he'll probably be there at 11. So just take him at 11.
Right.
And then you still get to have your 23rd.
It all depends on if you're afraid that maybe the Raiders want to jump you. So let's say maybe they trade with the Titans and they take Penix just to make sure they get their guy. And now the Vikings are sitting there at 11. You'll probably get Bo Nix there, but then you have to take Bo Nix at 11.
I come back to this a lot on this conversation. If 4 or 5 quarterbacks are going to be taken in the top 8 picks, holy cow, are some good players going to be available?
Right.
Like, don't move up to 7 to draft Penix. at that point. If the 4 big guys are gone, move up to 7 to get the stud at whatever position hasn't been taken yet. Because in reality now, you are going to have, if the top 4 quarterbacks go 1, 2, 3, 4, or, within the first 5 picks, you're moving up your draft stock anyway by 4 picks. Mm-hmm. If 2 other teams are going to be reaching for quarterbacks that way, like, I just don't get someone else, get a stud somewhere else. I would have no issue. I would have no issue with that if that ended up being the philosophy.
There's some mock drafts that have the Vikings taking Dallas Turner at 11, and that would be a player. Again, if all those guys slide, Dallas Turner's a guy you could take out of Alabama, defensive tackle. There's a defensive tackle out of Texas, Byron Murphy II, not to be confused with Byron Murphy Jr., the Vikings corner. Or you could get Cooper DeJean, who is the cornerback out of Iowa, who could improve your secondary. So like you said, there are going to be some players there, and especially because if it's not the quarterback, there's going to be teams eyeing up the stud wide receivers as well, which allows maybe a tackle who in a normal draft to go 4th overall can slide you at 11. And that, I think, gets us into this next one, and we'll end this conversation with this because I think we're both in agreement on the 7th overall pick. And that's pretty much the last spot really to trade up with. By the way, draft 2 weeks from today.
Yeah.
But let's put it in this way. If the Vikings have that spot at, let's say all those quarterbacks are gone, JJ McCarthy's gone, are you gambling on taking Penix at 11, or are you gambling on hoping that Penix or Nix are going to survive the Raiders and the Broncos and leave it at 23?
Is it lazy to say I don't really care? I think the Vikings are in such a good spot that if they want to get somebody, one of those guys at 11, they should do that because they're still going to get a pretty darn good player at 23. If they elect to not do that at 11 and take an arguably great player in that spot, and then those quarterbacks come off the table, you're still going to get that really good player at 23. I know that sounds lazy. I don't really care that much. I think they have this trade that they made to get the 2 first-round picks and all the capital that they've got coming their way in the future has given them a lot of different options that pretty much all equal to just making the right pick. Now, that's obviously up for debate on if they can do that or not, but they've given themselves so many opportunities to do the right thing that I almost don't care what the solution ends up being at this point. Now, if you got to move up to get one of your 3 guys or 4, cool. But if it's Penix or Nix, there's definitely better, more impactful players than those guys, probably. Right. And that's Vikings, okay. I'd be totally okay with that.
The Vikings did work out Byron Murphy earlier this week, and I think they also worked out Dallas Turner and a couple other players. So the Vikings are doing their due diligence on those defensive guys if they do need to pivot. So that definitely is on the table. This episode had a little bit of everything, Corey. We had some OJ talk. We had the Timberwolves ownership fiasco. We had Carlos Correa. We have quarterbacks, NFL draft talk. And tomorrow we'll have our activity director check in. We're going to talk with Matt Moen of Pillager. So there you go. That's what we call in the broadcasting business a tease.
Ooh, I like it.
This has been the Morning Sports Desk for Thursday, April 11th.